All right, ready to dive into another one?
Always.
This time we're tackling a classic, Norman Vincent Peale's The Power of Positive Thinking.
Oh, a big one. I bet a lot of people have at least heard of it, even if they haven't read the whole thing.
Definitely. Even the title itself is pretty iconic. But we're going deep, working with the full text of the book, so we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of Peale's methods.
Looking forward to it.
We've got some intriguing concepts to unpack, things like the mustard seed technique
Oh, yeah, that one's interesting.
and the idea of, emptying your mind of worry and then filling it with, well, something much more powerful.
He gets into some pretty deep stuff.
He even makes connections between emotions and physical health in ways you might not expect.
Absolutely. Peele was ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
So get ready to have your mind changed. I think one of the things that makes this book so enduring is that Peele starts with something most of us can relate to, that nagging sense of inferiority.
Yeah, that feeling of not being good enough. It's so common.
Exactly. And he opens the book with this story about a businessman on the verge of a huge deal, like a career-defining moment.
High stakes.
But he's completely frozen by self-doubt. He's just convinced he's going to fail.
I can relate to that feeling, those moments when fear takes over.
But instead of offering some generic pep talk, Peale introduces a simple Bible verse,
Which is
"If ye have faith, nothing shall be impossible unto you."
Matthew 17.20, if I'm not mistaken.
You got it. And this verse becomes like a mantra for the businessman.
So it's not just about thinking happy thoughts.
It's deeper than that. It's about replacing those negative thoughts with something concrete, something powerful.
So instead of I'm going to mess this up, it becomes I have the faith to succeed.
Exactly. And that, I think, is a core principle in Peele's approach. Identify the negative thought and consciously, deliberately replace it with a positive affirmation.
Powerful stuff. And he uses another example to drive home this point. A young executive, super insecure, ends up accidentally spilling confidential information.
Oof, that's rough.
Big time backfire. And Peele, again, zeroes in on understanding the root cause. He helps the executive see that his insecurity was driving this need to prove himself, which, well, it all blew up in his face.
Makes you think, huh? Like, have you ever felt held back by self-doubt?
Oh, countless times, I'm sure.
But have you ever stopped to examine the root causes of those insecurities? It can be pretty eye-opening.
Absolutely. And Peele dives into that. But he doesn't stop at just identifying the problem. He gives us some really concrete techniques to build genuine confidence.
And some of them are surprisingly simple, like that story of the salesman who kept cards with Bible verses in his car.
Always had those reminders with him.
It seems almost too easy. But I can see how having those visual reminders all throughout the day could be incredibly powerful.
It's about repetition, right?
Exactly. Peale was tapping into what we now know about forming habits. Those visual cues, the repeated exposure, it gradually rewires our brains.
So even if someone's not particularly religious, the principle still holds true.
Definitely. It's about consciously choosing the thoughts you want to cultivate. And it ties into another key point that Peale makes: focusing on assets, not liabilities. He tells this story about a businessman who was utterly convinced he'd lost everything.
Like down to his last dollar?
Pretty much, yeah, ready to just give up completely. But Peale encourages him to take stock of what he does have: his skills, his relationships, even those hidden opportunities he hadn't even considered.
It's like that saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. We get so fixated on the negative that we miss the good stuff that's still there.
Absolutely. It's a powerful shift in perspective and something we can all do. Take some time to make a list of your assets, your strengths, and not just material things, but like the people who support you, the opportunities that are out there.
It's a great exercise for sure. A reminder that even when things feel bleak, we often have more going for us than we realize. But Peele doesn't stop at building confidence. He goes even deeper, talking about the importance of inner peace.
Inner peace. It sounds so serene.
He argues that a peaceful mind is not only crucial for happiness, but also for success. He actually uses the word tranquility quite a bit.
Tranquility. I like that.
It's not just the absence of stress. It's a more profound sense of calm and well-being.
It sounds lovely.
And he tells this story about a man who finds this tranquility in a pretty unexpected way, through praying over the phone.
Over the phone?
Yeah. He was skeptical at first, but it ends up totally transforming his outlook.
Interesting. So what other techniques does Peale suggest for finding this inner peace?
Visualization plays a big role. He encourages readers to picture those tranquil scenes. A calm lake, a peaceful forest, whatever brings a sense of calm.
Like taking a mental vacation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He also advises against negative conversations.
Steering clear of all that drama.
And he suggests consciously choosing positive and optimistic language.
Sounds like a good practice in general.
And maybe most importantly, he emphasizes the power of silence.
Silence. In our world, I feel like that's almost a radical idea these days.
It is. In our noisy, always connected world, carving out moments of quiet just to be still. It's something we could all benefit from.
I think you're right. And then, of course, there's prayer. Peale was a big proponent, as you might expect, but he sees it as more than just calling up to a higher power in a moment of crisis.
Right, not just a last resort.
He advocates for a really practical approach, using prayer for guidance in everyday life, for problem solving, even as a source of energy.
I like that. Like, what about that businessman who prayed with his minister for a solution to a business problem?
Oh yeah, that's a great example. What's interesting is that the answer he received wasn't at all what he was expecting.
But it ended up being exactly what he needed.
Exactly. It's about opening yourself to guidance, to a different perspective.
I love that. What about Jack Smith, that health club operator? He used what he called affirmative prayer for both spiritual and physical well-being.
That's right. It's almost like Peale is suggesting prayer can operate according to certain principles. Like a science, almost.
Fascinating. Which reminds me of that story about those two industrialists who brought in a preacher just to make sure they had the right number of people praying for a certain outcome.
Oh yeah. The 2 or 3 gathered principle. It might sound a bit superstitious, but it speaks to their belief in the power of collective prayer.
Definitely. And it's interesting how Peale seems open to all these different interpretations. It's like he's encouraging people to experiment, find what works for them.
Absolutely. And that's something we'll definitely be exploring further as we continue our deep dive. All right, so in part 1, we covered a lot. Overcoming inferiority, finding that inner peace, even those pretty wild stories about the power of belief and visualization.
Yeah, we touched on a lot.
But you mentioned there might be a more, I guess you could say, controversial side to Peale's work.
Yeah, there are some critiques. One is that his focus on individual responsibility maybe kind of downplays systemic issues.
Like societal structures, those sorts of things.
Exactly. Some argue his message could almost come across as, if you just think positively and pray hard enough, you can overcome anything.
Regardless of external factors, like race or socioeconomic background.
Right. Like, is it really that simple?
Of course, we have to acknowledge his work was written in a different time.
A different world. Definitely important context.
But it's also important to keep in mind that doesn't mean his teachings are irrelevant now.
Oh, for sure not. I think it's about applying them with more nuance.
Right. We can't ignore those social issues.
Yeah.
We can't pretend everyone has the same opportunities.
Definitely not. It's not about denying reality. It's about empowering individuals within those existing systems.
It's about agency, not denial. Absolutely. Something else I'm really curious about is Peale's view on healing. He had those incredible stories about people experiencing physical healing through faith.
Yeah, those are powerful stories.
Inspiring, but also potentially controversial.
Oh, definitely. Some people see those as anecdotal, not like hard scientific proof.
And it is crucial to remember that Peale himself was very clear. Faith should not replace medical care.
Right, he was adamant about that.
He believed they work together. It's not an either situation.
And what's fascinating is these days we're seeing more and more in science about the mind-body connection.
Yeah, how our thoughts and emotions can actually influence our physical health.
It's pretty amazing.
Okay.
So Peale was really ahead of the curve on that.
He was, but still, those stories where people were seemingly cured through faith alone, it makes you wonder.
It does. It's like, how do we reconcile those with a more scientific perspective?
We can't just accept them blindly as proof of miracles, but dismissing them completely also feels off.
Like just saying it's all placebo?
Yeah. Maybe we need to find some balance.
Between being critical and open to possibilities we don't fully understand yet.
Right. Peale himself acknowledged faith is about belief.
Yeah.
And belief can't be scientifically proven or disproven.
Exactly.
So ultimately, whether someone accepts those stories as proof of miraculous healing, that's personal.
It is.
What resonates for one person might not for another.
For sure. But I do think there's something to be said for the role of hope and positive expectation in healing.
Regardless of anyone's specific beliefs.
Exactly. And that's a huge theme for Peale. He argues that our beliefs and attitudes profoundly impact our experiences, positive and negative.
So even if someone's not totally convinced that faith can, say, cure cancer, just the act of cultivating that positive mindset, believing in the possibility of healing, that can still be incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. It's about harnessing the power of the mind to support overall well-being. And Peele doesn't just focus on physical healing, he also deals with emotional wounds, which can be just as painful.
Oh yeah, those can be even tougher to heal sometimes.
Absolutely. He dedicates a whole section to dealing with heartache, the pain of grief and loss.
Which everyone experiences at some point.
He offers advice for dealing with those heavy emotions, staying active, not dwelling on the pain too much, and finding meaning in both life and death.
And he also shares his own belief, right, in the continuation of life beyond the physical.
Yeah, he found comfort in that idea of reuniting with loved ones who've passed.
Which, for some people, can be a very comforting thought.
Definitely. And I think it points to something important, finding a philosophy that offers solace and meaning in the face of loss, whatever that may be.
What works for you?
Exactly. He even shares anecdotes from people who've had experiences suggesting an afterlife. That woman who saw her deceased husband while she was dying, for example.
And what about Arthur Godfrey? That dream of his father saying goodbye, right when his father actually passed.
And Mary Margaret McBride sensing her mother's presence after she died.
Oh, and that engineer, the one who had a vision of, like, beauty and light and peace while he was near death.
Yeah, those are...
Intense.
They are. Even if we interpret them differently, I think they offer a glimpse into those bigger questions.
That maybe there's more to life and death than we fully understand.
Maybe. But Peele doesn't just dwell on the afterlife. He also focuses on those challenges we face here and now. Negative emotions.
Like anger and resentment.
Yeah, holding on to grudges. He even quotes a doctor who thought a patient died of, get this, grudgitis.
Grudgitis, wow.
A long-held grudge, literally killing him. It's a pretty stark reminder about the toxic power of negativity and the importance of forgiveness.
So how do we let go of those grudges?
Peele has some concrete advice, like praying for the person you resent.
Really?
It might seem counterintuitive, but he was adamant that it works. He also suggests finding someone you trust and just like pouring out your grievance until it's gone.
Talking it out.
Releasing it.
Yeah.
Then Peele goes in a direction you might not expect. He has a whole section on the art of making people like you.
Interesting.
It might seem kind of superficial, but his point is that desire for connection, it's deeply human.
Wanting to be liked, to belong.
He uses those stories. That retired doctor who missed those constant phone calls he used to hate, and that young woman who thought she was an unwanted child, it crippled her.
It shows just how deep that need for validation runs. But how do we actually become more likable?
Peele has some tips. Being comfortable and easygoing, remembering names, showing genuine interest in others, even like bolstering their egos a bit.
Make them feel good about themselves.
Exactly. It's about making that effort to understand and appreciate others. And honestly, this all ties back into his core message, love. He truly believes it's the most powerful force there is.
And not just romantic love, right?
No. This is love as a choice, an action. He encourages us to love not only those close to us, but also the difficult people.
The ones who push our buttons?
He even suggests praying for those we resent, believing love can overcome even the deepest anger.
So love isn't passive.
Not at all. It takes strength and courage to extend grace and compassion even when it's tough. It's choosing to see the good in others even when they're not showing their best.
And realizing that love, well, it's not always easy.
No, it's not. But it's worth it.
All right, so we've spent the last two parts really digging into the power of positive thinking. We've talked about everything from overcoming that feeling of not being good enough, to finding inner peace, to those stories about healing with faith.
A lot to unpack, for sure.
But the question that keeps coming back to me is, how do we actually apply these ideas?
Right. It's one thing to read about positive thinking, but how do you actually make it a reality?
Exactly. So where do we even begin? What's the first step in actually putting this into practice?
Well, Peele really stresses the importance of first identifying those negative thoughts we have.
Become aware of them.
Yeah, and then consciously replacing them with those positive affirmations. He talks about those thought patterns we get stuck in, almost like grooves in a record.
It's playing the same negative tune over and over.
Exactly. We have to break free from those limiting beliefs, consciously choose a different track.
So it's like we're rewiring our brains, creating new pathways.
You got it. And he suggests using tools like Visualization, repetition. Remember that salesman, the one with those Bible verse cards in his car?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm Andy.
He was constantly feeding his mind with positive affirmations, almost like creating a mental diet of positive thoughts.
Interesting analogy.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond just the words themselves, right? It's the actual act of choosing those thoughts
Yeah.
deliberately, over and over.
Absolutely. And Peale reminds us action is key. Faith without works is dead, as he famously said.
Not just sitting around thinking positive thoughts.
Right. Got to put those beliefs into practice. Take action, make steps towards those goals, keep growing.
So it's not passive. It's about fueling those actions with belief in yourself, your ability to achieve.
Exactly. And he's realistic. He acknowledges that change is tough.
It takes work.
It does. Breaking those old habits, building new ones. But he believes it's possible. And he offers a lot of tools to help.
Practical strategies.
And he encourages us to be patient with ourselves, with the process, to celebrate those small wins.
And to never give up on what we can achieve.
Exactly. We're all works in progress. And we don't have to do it alone.
He talks a lot about that, right? Seeking support.
Oh, yeah. Whether it's friends, family, a therapist, even a spiritual community.
He knew we're stronger together,
Yeah.
that we need those connections to help us along the way. You know, one thing that struck me is how relevant his teaching on finding peace is, like even today.
In all this chaos.
Yeah. He was writing in a totally different era, but his ideas about slowing down, cutting out the noise, finding stillness, those feel more important now than ever,
Absolutely. It's like he anticipated the challenges of our hyper-connected world.
and gave us the tools to deal with them.
Remember those mental sanctuaries we talked about? Picturing peaceful scenes, repeating calming phrases.
Like mini vacations for your mind.
Creating those pockets of peace in a crazy busy day. And of course, making those relationships a priority. Peale was adamant about that.
They're our greatest assets.
He reminds us to nurture those connections, put down the phones, turn off the screens, really be present with the people we care about.
Quality time, real connection, and making those around us feel valued.
Exactly. And building strong relationships, it's not just about feeling good, it's essential for success, too.
In all areas of life.
Peale saw those relationships as our most valuable resources.
So investing in them, it's crucial. You know, we've covered so much, but I want to come back to Peale's core message, faith. He was obviously a devout Christian, but I think his teachings on faith can apply more broadly.
For sure. It's not about adhering to any specific religion. He was talking about tapping into that source of strength, something greater than ourselves.
Whether you call it God, the universe, your higher self, whatever resonates.
Exactly. He believed we all have access to that power, and he encourages us to cultivate that connection.
Through prayer, meditation, just being open to the possibility.
It's about trusting in something beyond our limited understanding, something that can guide us, support us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the power of positive thinking, I'm left with a sense of, well, possibility, but also responsibility.
I get that. Peale's work reminds us that we have so much power to create the life we want. But we have to take action, cultivate that positive mindset, nurture those connections, and tap into that source of strength that's always there.
It's all within our reach. Well, this has been another incredible deep dive. Thank you so much for exploring the power of positive thinking with us.
Always a pleasure.
And remember, the power to change your life, it starts with your thoughts. Choose them wisely, nurture those connections, and never stop believing in yourself. Until next time, keep thinking positive and keep diving deep.